Millionaire CEO sees his ex-wife on a plane with twins who look like him and feels something different when approaching them. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. Edward Davis glanced out the window of his private jet, his knuckles tight against the armrest. High above a sea of cotton-like clouds, he tried to calm the restless pulse at his temple. Everything about this flight felt wrong. It should have been a routine trip to attend a crucial business negotiation, yet a gnawing sense of dread told him that the turbulence he feared wouldn't come solely from the skies. He exhaled slowly and shifted in the soft leather seat. At first, he attributed his tension to the upcoming deal. This contract could make or break his reputation in front of the board. His rival, Lionel Pierce, lurked in the corporate shadows, rumored to be planning a strike. But something deeper tugged at Edward's awareness. He couldn't shake the feeling that bigger challenges, far more personal, awaited him before wheels touched the runway. His longtime assistant, Adrian, sat nearby, flipping through a stack of documents. He glanced up, concern written across his features. "Sir, is everything all right?" he asked quietly. Edward rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Just a headache," he replied, though he knew Adrian wasn't fooled. The tension humming around Edward had a sharper edge than any standard corporate stress. He forced his eyes to the far end of the jet's cabin, hoping a casual inspection of other passengers would distract him. A handful of company employees were seated in neat rows, each absorbed in their own tasks. Uniformed flight attendants checked overhead compartments, while two security guards maintained a vigilant watch at the entrance. It all looked normal, until he noticed someone stepping through the hatch flanked by two small children. His breath caught. Valerie. She moved with the same soft grace Edward remembered, shoulders squared and head held high, though her features betrayed a certain wariness. Beside her stood two golden-haired twins, identical in every way except for a tiny freckle on the boy's cheek. The children's bright eyes darted around the jet as though it were an unfamiliar castle they had just been invited into. In that moment, Edward's heart pounded so loudly he was sure Adrian could hear it. He sank deeper into his seat, half wishing he could vanish into the upholstery. The twins, he had never laid eyes on them before. Yet something about the shape of their faces, the exact shade of their hair, struck him like lightning. They looked eerily like a reflection of himself in some childhood photograph he barely remembered. Adrian followed Edward's gaze and recognized Valerie. He offered a discreet nod, then pretended to return to his paperwork. It was clear he had no idea what to say. After all, Edward never spoke about his ex-wife, and no one in his circle had seen her in years. Edward shifted, forcing himself to maintain composure. He reminded himself that employees, bodyguards, even the flight attendants might notice any sign of emotional distress. He had a corporate empire to command. He couldn't let personal confusion overshadow that. Still, as Valerie and the twins walked down the aisle, every nerve in Edward's body seemed to quiver. The children paused, staring at Edward for a brief second. One twin smiled hesitantly, as if recognizing an unspoken bond, then continued down the aisle to seats further back. Valerie's eyes flicked toward Edward, just a heartbeat of acknowledgement, before she guided the kids to sit. Edward squeezed his eyes shut, recalling the last time he saw Valerie. It had been a frigid morning, all tension and anger, with corporate demands tugging him one way and her pleas for a normal life tugging another. In the end, a gulf opened between them that neither made an effort to bridge. And now she was here, with twins who looked exactly like him. Adrian leaned in, his voice a whisper. "What do you want me to do? Should we offer to move her to another plane? Or—" "No," Edward said, swallowing hard. "It's fine. We can't make a scene." He wasn't sure who he was protecting with that statement, his image or the children's innocence. Moments later, the jet taxied onto the runway and lifted off with a roar. Edward tried to breathe in sync with the engine's rumble, focusing on the bright skyline outside. but his mind wouldn't relent. 1,000 questions crowded his thoughts, all beginning with how and why. Still, he forced himself to keep still, gazing out the window as the land shrank below. Roughly an hour into the flight, a faint beep from the overhead speakers announced some mild turbulence ahead. The pilot's calm voice echoed through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. We expect some bumps." Edward clicked his belt securely, noticing movement toward the front of the aircraft. One of his security detail whispered into his collar mic, glaring at a man who had stood up with a camera in hand. Edward's pulse quickened. A paparazzi, or worse, an infiltrator. In an instant, the so-called staffer lunged down the aisle, snapping photos of Edward and, to his horror, turning the lens toward Valerie and the twins. "Hey!" the intruder called. "Is this your secret family, Mr. Davis? Care to comment on the rumors about these kids?" Edward's jaw tightened. He unbuckled and shot to his feet, ignoring Adrian's attempt to hold him back. The cabin lurched with turbulence, forcing him to brace against the seat. Flight attendants gasped as the overhead lights blinked. The paparazzi reeled sideways, struggling to keep the camera steady. "Stop!" Edward barked, stepping into the aisle. "Who let you on this flight?" The man ignored him, snapping another round of pictures. Valerie half rose, shielding the children, her expression caught between rage and fear. One twin clutched her hand, eyes wide with confusion. Edward's security detail launched forward, tackling the paparazzi before he could take another shot. The plane trembled in the air, sending overhead compartments rattling. A scuffle broke out between the intruder and two guards near the emergency exit door. Gasps and shouts echoed in the narrow space, and for a moment, Edward feared the chaos might escalate to the point of actual danger. He grabbed the back of a seat to keep his balance, swallowing a surge of panic. He had endured hostile takeovers and cutthroat negotiations, but never had he felt so out of control in such a confined space. Valerie turned away from the tussle, embracing the twins, who buried their faces in her jacket. Seeing them so frightened stirred something fierce in Edward. His carefully composed facade cracked. Without hesitation, he strode to Valerie's row. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. The younger twin let out a soft whimper, and Valerie soothed him, whispering gentle words. Over her shoulder, Edward noticed the curve of the child's chin, a mirror of his own. He had no idea how to process that, not in the midst of the present chaos. At last, the guards subdued the paparazzi, disarming him of any hidden devices. One guard pinned the man's arms behind his back, while another tore the camera strap from his grip. Sweat beaded on Edward's forehead as the plane gave another violent shake, sending the overhead lights flickering. The children whimpered, and a wave of protective instinct rose within him, fierce and unfamiliar. After a few more moments of tense jostling, the turbulence eased. The guard signaled that the paparazzi was secured. Adrian stepped forward, grim expression in place. "I'll notify the pilot," he said. "We'll make sure he's handed over to the authorities when we land." Edward exhaled in relief, yet his eyes lingered on Valerie and the twins. At any moment, someone could have been hurt in that chaos. He forced a steadying breath and turned, half expecting Valerie to blast him with accusations. How had a stranger gotten on his private flight, or why was their personal drama now front-page news? But instead, her eyes glimmered with an emotion he couldn't fully decipher. Fear? Anger? Maybe a touch of old sorrow. He stepped away from the scuffle, running a hand through his hair. One by one, other passengers began to return to their seats, the flight attendants calming them with reassurances. The two guards led the paparazzi to an empty corner of the jet, out of sight, but Edward could still hear muffled protests. He closed his eyes, heart thudding painfully in his chest. Eventually, the overhead speaker crackled again. "We apologize for the unexpected disturbance," came the pilot's voice. "We'll be landing in a couple of hours. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Edward glanced back at Valerie. She offered a small nod, as though acknowledging this would hardly be the last uproar they faced. The subtle gesture made him realize it was time for a reckoning. There were too many secrets and unanswered questions, starting with why she had chosen to board his plane and whether these children were indeed his. He needed answers. The sense of looming confrontation he had felt since takeoff was now unavoidable. His gaze flicked from Valerie's subdued expression to the twins' anxious faces, then to the rows of employees and bodyguards who were all trying and failing to pretend they hadn't witnessed the entire spectacle. Wiping sweat from his brow, he forced his breathing to steady. No matter what corporate crisis awaited him upon landing, none of it compared to the shock of possibly discovering that he was a father. The idea alone rattled him. He had spent years amassing fortunes and forging powerful connections, yet he had never faced such raw vulnerability. He took a hesitant step toward Valerie's seat, half kneeling in the aisle so as not to tower over the children. In a low voice meant only for her to hear, he said, "We're going to land soon. I think it's time we—" She lifted her eyes to meet his, and the sadness there was palpable. "Yes," she said softly, a hint of tremor in her tone. "We do." A soft swirl of panic and relief coursed through Edward. He wasn't sure if he was more terrified of hearing what she had to say or of continuing in this uncertain limbo. Regardless, he wouldn't run from it anymore. In the hush that followed, the jet soared onward with an almost eerie calm. Behind them, security officers resumed their posts, the intruder subdued. Adrian and the flight attendants returned to tidying the cabin. Yet for Edward, the quiet was charged with electric promise, as if everything he'd built stood on a precipice, waiting for his next move. At last, he stood and offered a hand to help Valerie up, but she remained seated, one arm still protectively around the twins. He understood. This was a conversation best had when they could speak freely. No more half-revealed truths or anxious glances. It was time for honesty. His throat felt dry as he straightened his jacket. He could feel eyes on him from all sides, but none of that mattered. What mattered was getting to the bottom of whatever was happening here, and facing his past head-on, no matter the consequences. With adrenaline still coursing through him, Edward looked down at Valerie and murmured, his voice just loud enough for her to hear, "We need to talk. About them." She nodded reluctantly, setting the stage for a long-overdue conversation. Edward felt the steady hum of the plane's engines beneath his feet as he walked toward the small lounge at the back of the cabin. The flight attendant had discreetly gestured that Valerie was waiting there. Outside, clouds drifted by in endless white banks, but all Edward could think about was the swirling chaos inside him. The confrontation with that paparazzo still pulsed in his memory, and the knowledge that Valerie had appeared on his plane with 2 children who might be his loomed like a storm cloud. He found her standing by a narrow window, arms folded around herself, lost in thought. For a moment, he paused in the doorway, unsure how to begin. The quiet felt thick, and he cleared his throat softly. "Valerie," he said, taking a small step closer. She turned, her expression wary. He saw echoes of the past in her eyes, the stubbornness, the pain, the resilience that once drew him to her in the first place. She let out a slow breath. "Let's just get this conversation over with." He nodded. The lounge was barely large enough for more than a couple of seats and a small table, yet the 2 of them seemed oceans apart. "I'm sorry," he began. "I'm sorry for how everything just blew up back there." Valerie shook her head. "It's not your fault that man decided to sneak on board," she said quietly, "but you and I both know there's more to discuss than just some tabloid stunt." Edward's chest tightened. "Yes, the twins. Are they—" Her eyes flickered with a mix of hurt and defensive pride. "Their names are Noah and Lily," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They turned 5 last month." Edward exhaled, heart pounding as though he'd run miles. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. 5 years. That number reverberated inside him, painting a picture of all the birthdays, bedtime stories, and first steps he'd missed, moments he never even knew existed. "Do they?" Valerie pressed her lips together. "They don't know about you," she admitted. "Not fully. I told them I was once married, but I never said much more." He sank into one of the small seats, his shoulders slumping. "Why?" he asked, voice strained. "Why not tell me?" Her eyes flashed. "You left our life, Edward. I reached a point where I thought it would be better if we both moved on, and I never imagined you'd be part of their world, so I kept it to myself. My decision, right or wrong." An ache spread in his chest. Memories flooded back, the ambitions that drove him, the arguments that scorched their home life, the phone calls he'd missed. He still recalled that final day they'd spoken, the frustration in her voice, the weight of deadlines in his. Now, the regret felt heavier than any corporate burden he'd ever carried. Before he could reply, a hesitant knock sounded at the lounge door. Adrian stepped in, eyes darting awkwardly between them. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I think you both should see something." He held out a tablet displaying a headline from a major financial news site. Edward's photo took up half the screen, a red banner announcing CEO Edward Davis allegedly hiding secret family. Valerie's face paled. "Already?" she whispered. "That fast?" Edward snatched the tablet, scanning the text. The article was riddled with phrases like unnamed sources, rumors, and unconfirmed allegations. Yet the tone was damning, painting him as a corporate shark who'd left an ex-wife and twin children in the shadows. His jaw clenched. "This is Lionel's doing. It has to be." Adrian nodded in agreement. "Could be, and there's more. We got word from the legal department. The board wants immediate damage control. Our share price is reacting to all this gossip." Valerie crossed her arms, voice trembling with anger. Do they not care that there are actual children involved here? Real lives, not just headlines? Edward set the tablet aside. In the corporate world, sensational stories often overshadow the truth. Lionel Pierce knows this, and he's exploiting it. He looked at Valerie. "I promise you I'll protect Noah and Lily from this insanity." Her expression hardened. "Will you? Your security team couldn't even keep that paparazzo off this plane. The moment we land, there will be a swarm of cameras waiting. How exactly do you plan on keeping them safe?" Edward shut his eyes, exhaling slowly. He hated feeling powerless, but there it was, a chasm between his promises and what he could actually deliver. "We'll figure something out," he said, rubbing his temples. "I have contacts. We can get them through the airport quietly, keep them out of the press's eye as much as possible." Valerie didn't look reassured, but she nodded. "All right, I'll hold you to that." Adrian cleared his throat again, glancing toward the hallway. "They need you up front," he told Edward. "Some press calls are coming in and your PR team is scrambling." Edward stood, running a hand through his hair. "I'll handle it," he replied. Then he turned back to Valerie. "This conversation isn't finished." She let out a humorless laugh. "You think?" He walked out, heading toward the plane's communication area, where he could do some damage control. Even as the flight attendants busied themselves, the atmosphere felt charged. Edward's mind flicked back to the stunned look on the twins' faces when that paparazzo accosted them and the fierce way Valerie had drawn them close. He realized that despite all his wealth and influence, he had been helpless in that moment to protect them. It stung. A few tense minutes passed as Edward fielded calls from the company's legal counsel. Valerie remained in the lounge, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She could hear the twins in the adjacent row. Lily was humming softly, while Noah asked questions about clouds and where airplanes went. Valerie forced a bright tone as she told them everything was fine, even though her mind churned with worry. She still couldn't fully grasp the situation. For so long, she'd believed the best path was to raise the twins away from Edward's intense lifestyle. Now, thrust into the spotlight, she was forced to reconsider every decision she'd made. Did she do more harm than good by keeping the twins a secret? The guilt and uncertainty weighed heavily. The plane shuddered slightly as the pilot announced their descent. Edward emerged from his conversation looking even more grim than before. "There's no getting around this," he said quietly to Valerie. "Reporters are already camped at the terminal. They're not going to leave until they get some version of the truth." She pressed her lips together. "Then I guess I'll have to trust you to handle it." She looked away, adding softly, "For their sake." He nodded, shoulders squared. "Let's do our best to keep them out of the camera's line of sight. Adrian and security will lead us through a private exit if possible." The children stared out the windows as the plane landed, transfixed by the runway lights. Edward stood behind them, hands resting uneasily on the seat tops. He swallowed back the swirling mix of emotions: fear, protectiveness, regret. Once the engines cut off and the doors opened, the flight attendants directed passengers to disembark. Adrian motioned for Edward and Valerie to wait until the plane cleared out. The tension was almost suffocating. Finally, the guard in charge signaled it was time to move. Edward turned to Valerie. "Let me go first with the security detail. Stay right behind me. Keep the kids close." She gathered Noah and Lily, nodding briefly. Just as they stepped into the aisle, Edward's phone vibrated. He paused, pulling it out to see a notification from an unknown number. The message read, "They know about your secret family. Expect more trouble." A chill slid down his spine. He glanced at Valerie, who caught the change in his expression. "What is it now?" she asked, anxiety evident in her voice. He showed her the screen. The color drained from her face. "Who sent that?" she whispered, glancing around as if someone might be listening in. "No idea," he replied, voice tight. "But it means someone's pulling the strings to exploit this situation, someone who knows far too much." Valerie swallowed hard. The children gazed up at them, sensing the adults' fear, though they didn't understand why. Edward's throat felt tight, but he steadied himself. Reaching for her elbow, he guided Valerie and the twins toward the door. Outside, bright flashes of camera bulbs sparked through the windows, every reporter on edge for that first exclusive shot. Edward inhaled, remembering every tough negotiation he'd ever handled. None of it compared to this moment. He held the phone out to Valerie again, letting her reread the ominous text. She shook her head, then looked at the children. "We'll protect them," Edward murmured, though his own heart thundered with uncertainty. Together they stepped off the plane, bracing for a storm of questions and the possibility that a hidden hand was pulling all the strings. Edward stepped off the final stair of the plane, a polite but firm grip on Noah's little hand while Valerie carried Lily. The moment they emerged under the airport's fluorescent lights, the rush of noise hit them like a sudden downpour. Cameras flashed in rapid succession and voices clamored for attention. He could hardly see beyond the glare, yet each urgent question rang loud and clear. "Mr. Davis, is it true you've been hiding a family for years? Valerie, can you confirm Edward abandoned you and the twins? Are these children really yours, Mr. Davis?" Alarm rippled through his chest. He squeezed Noah's hand gently, trying to exude calm. The boy was wide-eyed, twisting to catch glimpses of the buzzing scene. Behind them, Adrian motioned briskly to the security team, who did their best to form a protective wall around Edward and Valerie. Lily clung to her mother, burying her face in the crook of Valerie's neck. "Keep moving," Adrian urged in a low voice, pointing to a side exit. "We have a car waiting." Edward felt Valerie press close behind him. She was uncharacteristically silent, her shoulders tense. In the swirl of reporters, he overheard fragments of conversation about share prices tanking, about the scandal overshadowing his latest corporate venture. His pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of storm Lionel Pierce would want, to see Edward compromised in the public eye, overshadowed by personal drama. They hurried through an endless corridor, flashbulbs tracking their progress. Noah suddenly pulled back, startled by a microphone pushed too close. Edward scooped the boy into his arms. A reporter attempted to shout something about secret children, but one of the bodyguards stepped in, directing them away with a stern warning. Moments later, they slipped through a secure side door and into a private loading area. 2 black SUVs idled by a curb. Edward signaled for Valerie to hurry toward the first car. He could hear shouting from behind, along with camera shutters clicking frantically, but the security detail held the reporters at bay long enough for them to climb in. Valerie settled in the back seat, placing Lily on her lap. Edward slid in beside her, still holding Noah. He exchanged a quick glance with Adrian, who took the front passenger seat. With a nod from the driver, the SUV roared to life, leaving the chaotic scene behind. The tinted windows blocked the worst of the camera flashes, though Edward imagined they were still being photographed from every angle. Valerie finally exhaled. Her eyes darted to the children, then to Edward, then back to the passing streets outside. "This is too much," she murmured. "They're acting like we're on display at a circus." Noah was uncharacteristically quiet, staring at Edward as if looking for reassurance. Edward brushed a comforting hand over the boy's hair, heart heavy with remorse. "I know," he said softly. "I'm sorry." Adrian turned in his seat. "Sir, the board has already reached out, twice. They want you in an emergency session as soon as possible. There's talk of a press conference." "A press conference?" Valerie repeated, aghast. "Isn't what just happened at the airport enough publicity?" Edward loosened his tie, feeling the noose of responsibility tighten. "The board must think I need to address the rumors head-on, or the company's going to keep bleeding. We can't just ignore this." She let out a small scoff, her expression torn between anger and resignation. "What are you going to do, Edward? Stand at a podium and announce you've discovered you have 2 children out of nowhere? How is that going to protect them from the press?" He shook his head, voice subdued. "I don't have all the answers right now, but this is my mess. I won't let them pay the price." He looked at Adrian, signaling he would handle whatever the board demanded, and the assistant nodded. A quiet lull settled in the car, filled only by the occasional soft questions from Lily. "Mommy, why are those people shouting?" Valerie tried to explain in vague, reassuring terms, but the sorrow in her voice was unmistakable. Within half an hour, they arrived at the corporate tower's underground parking entrance. Uniformed security waved them past the barrier, and the SUV descended into a private garage. There, Edward's personal guard escorted them to a back elevator that opened directly to his executive floor. As they stepped out, a hush fell over the normally bustling reception area. Employees noticed the presence of 2 small, confused children, and a few exchanged knowing glances. The scandal had apparently traveled faster than they had. Edward guided Valerie and the twins into a conference room, instructing a staff member to bring them water and something to keep the kids occupied. "Stay here," he said quietly to Valerie. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. After that, we'll figure out a better place for you and the children. Somewhere safe." She nodded, her expression guarded. "All right, but don't keep us waiting too long. I'm worried, Edward. People are out there prying into every part of our lives." He felt her words land like a weight in his chest. "I'll do what I can," he promised, then left to meet the board. Upstairs, the tension in the executive boardroom was tangible. 7 members of the board were waiting, some pacing, others muttering discontentedly. As soon as Edward entered, the questions poured in. "Is it true? Are those children yours? How does this affect our public image?" He raised a hand, cutting through their clamor. "I understand your concerns. Yes, there are children who may be mine, and it appears the news has broken publicly." He took a breath, struggling to maintain a level voice. "All I ask is for some time to handle this responsibly. We should focus on damage control and ensure the company remains stable." One member, a stern-faced older man, hissed, "Time isn't a luxury we have. Do you have any idea what this revelation is doing to our market confidence?" Edward tamped down the urge to snap back. I do, which is why we need a careful approach. Issuing a denial or unsubstantiated statement will only fuel more speculation. He glanced around the table, noticing a few members shifting uneasily. We need a concise press briefing, something that addresses the rumors without giving the media any more ammunition. A woman with silver-streaked hair, Charlotte Lynn, spoke up quietly. I agree. But the question is, how far do we go in confirming or denying the allegations? Is a simple statement from you enough, or do we bring the mother and the children into this? Edward winced. He knew involving Valerie and the twins publicly was the last thing he wanted, but ignoring the situation entirely might be worse. Let me handle it, he said. I'll make a statement that addresses the basic facts and we'll take it from there. No mention of the children's identities. They're off limits. Fine, the stern-faced board member said, crossing his arms, but you need to do it soon. The world is watching. On his way out, Adrian caught up to Edward, holding a manila folder. Sir, I found something you should see. These documents tie Lionel Pierce to a PR firm that's been funneling stories to certain tabloids. No direct proof yet that he's behind today's airport ambush, but it's suspicious. Edward skimmed the pages. Anger flared in his gut as he realized Lionel had likely orchestrated the entire fiasco. So he's the puppet master, he muttered. We need a decisive move, Adrian. Adrian frowned. The press conference might be exactly the chance Lionel wants to see you cornered. Are you sure about this? We have to wrest back control of the narrative, Edward replied, steeling himself. If we keep dodging the press, we look guilty. If we say nothing, Lionel's leaks keep spreading. Better to face it head on. When Edward returned to Valerie and the children, they were sitting around a small table. Lily had a coloring book in front of her, while Noah was flipping through a picture book featuring airplanes and city skylines. Valerie stood as soon as Edward walked in. What did they say? I have to hold a press conference, he answered, voice subdued. I'll state the facts and refute the lies. I'll do everything I can to keep the twins out of it. She eyed him warily. And what if that doesn't stop the speculation? His gaze fell to Noah, who was listening with wide eyes, and Lily, who had looked up from her coloring to watch her mother's face. I can't promise it'll solve everything, Edward admitted, but it might help stabilize the situation before it spirals out of control. Reluctantly, Valerie agreed to remain in a nearby office with the children while Edward delivered his speech. She gave him a terse nod. Just be careful, she said, and he could tell from the catch in her voice that she still cared, no matter how much resentment lingered between them. Edward took a moment to muster his composure, changed into a crisp suit jacket, and stepped into the building's press room. Dozens of cameras were already set up, reporters murmuring among themselves. As he walked to the podium, a hush rippled through the crowd. He cleared his throat. Good afternoon. My name is Edward Davis, and I'd like to address the recent stories circulating in the media. For a moment, it seemed he had the room's undivided attention, and he spoke clearly, explaining that while personal matters had come to light, he would not deny responsibility if the children proved to be his. He condemned the harassment by paparazzi, insisting that family, especially minors, should be off limits. The board members stood behind him, stone-faced but present, seemingly unified for the cameras. Just as Edward started taking questions, a reporter toward the front sprang up, brandishing a set of papers. Mr. Davis, is this your marriage certificate with Valerie? And can you explain these photographs from 5 years ago showing you two together? They seem to confirm you lied about your relationship status while climbing the corporate ladder. How do you respond? Murmurs erupted around the room, and Edward's face went white with surprise. He felt the data in his mind unravel. The press was referencing proof he and Valerie had been married in secret, something he had hoped would remain buried in old records. He gripped the edges of the podium, his planned statement suddenly inadequate. The murmuring built into a roar as cameras turned to the side door, where Valerie, drawn by the commotion, now stood with a stunned expression. Security had tried to dissuade her from coming in, but the noise had been too great to ignore. The twins were out of sight, but seeing her face was enough to fan the crowd's frenzy. In a blink, the entire press room transformed into a cacophony of camera flashes and reporters shouting for clarification. The board members behind Edward exchanged alarmed looks, and Valerie, framed by the harsh glare of overhead lights, stared at him with unmasked fear. The room erupted with gasps and accusations. Valerie stood beside Edward, speechless, while the cameras captured their every reaction. Edward clutched the microphone, uncertain how to respond. The cameras continued to flash, each burst of light punctuating the stunned silence in the room. The accusations shouted by reporters hung in the air, and Edward clutched the microphone, trying to steady his thoughts. He saw the panic in Valerie's eyes and knew the twins had to be terrified wherever they were waiting. Everything he had feared was happening, an onslaught of public outrage crashing over them like a tidal wave. Clearing his throat, he forced himself to respond. "Yes," he managed, voice hoarse. "I was married to Valerie, and yes, the children might be mine." The hush that followed was eerie, as if even the cameras held their breath. He could only hope this reluctant confession would buy them a shred of mercy. A cacophony of questions resumed, each reporter more eager than the last to get a sensational angle. Edward's security team began ushering him away from the podium. Valerie stood rooted to the spot, looking as though she wanted to vanish. Finally, she hurried after Edward, ignoring the barrage of camera shutters and shouts trailing them. Behind the stage, in the dimly lit corridor, they found the twins tucked away with Adrian and Tasha. The children clung to each other, too frightened to cry, their eyes darting uncertainly between their mother and the unfamiliar environment. Valerie scooped Lily into her arms, breathing hard. "Let's get out of here," Edward said quietly, taking Noah's hand. He spotted a side exit guarded by two of his security staff and led them down the narrow hallway to a waiting elevator. The tension throbbed like a bruise. Nobody spoke a word until the elevator doors slid shut, finally cutting off the noise from the press conference. Adrian sent a quick message on his phone, arranging safe transport. Valerie rocked Lily against her shoulder, her breathing gradually slowing. When the elevator reached the executive floor, the group spilled out into a hushed lobby. They hurried through a set of tinted glass doors into Edward's personal office suite, a place that usually felt vast and impressive, but now seemed oppressive under the weight of scandal. Valerie sank onto a couch, Lily still clutching her arm, while Noah lingered uncertainly at Edward's side. Tasha rubbed Valerie's shoulder in wordless comfort. Edward let out a shaky exhale. He had hoped to keep the board and media storms separate from his children's lives, yet here they were, thrown into the middle of a corporate meltdown. Within minutes, a short, grim-faced board member hurried in, one of the senior executives who had witnessed the press conference carnage. "You have no idea how bad this looks," the man snapped, breath rasping. "Our stock price is already reacting. Investors are furious. They see your personal scandal as a sign of instability." Edward steeled his posture. "I understand," he replied, his voice more controlled than he felt. "This was never my intention, but we'll do what it takes to fix it. I won't let the company fail because of my personal matters." The board member's eyes flickered to Valerie and the twins, then back to Edward. Without another word, he stormed out, looking unconvinced. The tension in the room hung thick, as if everyone feared more bad news was seconds away. Valerie pressed a hand to her forehead. "I can't do this," she murmured. "I never wanted them exposed like this, paraded in front of cameras like a scandal." Edward knelt by the couch, keeping his voice low to avoid scaring the children further. "I know," he said, "and I'm so sorry. It's not right." Before she could answer, Adrian cleared his throat. "Lionel Pierce just made a public statement," he said, glancing at his phone. "He's claiming this fiasco is proof you can't handle running the company, Edward. He's urging the board to consider an alternative leader, someone more in control." A simmering anger rose in Edward's chest. Lionel had been his most dangerous competitor for years, a slick corporate rival eager to seize any weakness. Now it seemed he was fueling the media frenzy to drive Edward out. He took a moment to calm himself. It would do no good to explode in front of the twins. Valerie shifted Lily onto her lap. "Is this all about your corporation?" she asked bitterly. "What about these kids? We can't subject them to an endless cycle of tabloids and harassment." Edward looked at his children, at Noah, eyes wide with anxiety, and Lily, who had tucked her face against her mother's shirt. Guilt pressed down on him, and a flash of memory raced through his mind. The day he'd worked so late he'd missed the last flight home, leaving Valerie alone in an empty apartment. He could almost hear the echo of her pleas for him to slow down. If only he had listened. "We'll figure out a way to protect them," he promised, though each syllable felt heavy with doubt. Valerie shot him a cutting glare. "How? They're already pawns in this sick corporate chess match." He shook his head, not sure how to answer. From across the room, Tasha gently touched Valerie's shoulder. "Let him try," she urged. "You can't do this alone either." In the uneasy quiet that followed, Edward's phone buzzed. He grimaced at the screen. Another alert about plummeting stock figures. Another scathing commentary from business analysts. Lionel's name kept popping up, fueling speculation, discrediting Edward at every turn. By the time evening fell, Edward had locked himself in the office, reviewing documents Adrian laid out. Valerie stayed in a nearby lounge with the twins, wanting to keep them close. The hush of the building after hours felt strange, as though the place sensed the crisis. A little before midnight, Edward found a damning file, proof that Lionel had been in secret negotiations with a handful of Edward's shareholders, plotting to wrest control of the company from him. The numbers, the emails, they told a clear story of conspiracy. The realization made Edward's blood boil, and it also filled him with a cold sense of dread. This was just the beginning. Heart pounding, he rode the elevator to the top floor, stepping into the glass-walled penthouse office rarely used except for high-profile client meetings. He gazed out at the city lights, thinking about the empire he'd built from scratch. Shadows of regret flickered in the reflection. If he'd only spent a fraction of that ambition keeping Valerie and the children in his life, maybe none of this would be happening. His thoughts were interrupted by a buzzing from the security system. A voice crackled over the intercom. "Mr. Davis, we have movement on the lower floor. Looks like an unauthorized entry." Edward tensed, heart hammering. "Is it another reporter?" "Not sure," came the guard's uneasy reply. "We just see a figure moving down the corridor on the security feed." Within seconds, Edward was on the move. He rushed to the elevator, telling the guard to keep eyes on the intruder. Adrenaline thrummed in his veins as he descended floor by floor. When he stepped out into the hallway, the only illumination came from dim overhead lights. A sudden sound, footsteps, then a muffled clatter, echoed from around a corner. Edward sprinted in that direction. He found a figure in dark clothes rifling through a filing cabinet, rummaging as if searching for something specific. The intruder turned, face masked. Edward's security guards had arrived on the scene, flanking him. "Stop right there!" one of them barked. The intruder tried to bolt, but a second guard tackled him to the ground. A short struggle ensued, papers flying, file folders scattering across the polished floor. Edward approached, breath ragged, as the guards pinned the intruder's arms back. Another guard pulled a small flash drive from the intruder's clenched fist. "Caught him with this," he said grimly. "Trying to download files from your private server." Valerie's voice suddenly echoed from the nearby corridor. "Edward? What's going on?" She appeared, Tasha and the twins hovering behind her at a safer distance. One guard quickly ushered the children back, not wanting them to see the scuffle. Edward's pulse pounded, but he forced himself to keep calm for their sake. "It's all right," he said quietly. "Just go back. We'll handle this." Valerie stared at the intruder pinned to the floor, fear flashing in her eyes. She gave a short, tense nod, then retreated with the children. Edward refocused on the masked figure. Security yanked off the mask, revealing a face he faintly recognized. Someone from a PR firm rumored to be connected to Lionel. His jaw tightened. "Take him to the building's holding room," Edward ordered the guards, voice low. "Call the authorities." The intruder dropped the flash drive in a last-ditch effort to free himself, but Edward scooped it up. The guards marched the struggling man away, leaving Edward alone in the dark hallway with the stolen device in hand. He could hear Valerie's voice in the distance, soothing the twins, urging them not to worry. His shoulders slumped under the weight of it all. He looked down at the flash drive, a tiny piece of hardware that might contain proof of Lionel's deeper scheme. With measured steps, he returned upstairs and found an isolated office corner. Carefully, he plugged the device into a secure laptop, entering encryption overrides so he could see whatever had been downloaded. When the files appeared on screen, Edward's breath caught in his throat. Hundreds of documents scrolled past. Personal photographs, private emails, even images of the twins. There were spreadsheets linking high-ranking corporate officials to hush money deposits. The deeper he scrolled, the more shock and dread sank in. Each file implicated a powerful corner of his world in this orchestrated campaign to tear him and his family apart. He stared at the screen, realization crashing over him. This wasn't just Lionel trying to dethrone him. Others in the corporate landscape were involved, layering betrayal on top of betrayal. And everything from birth certificates to legal documents was in these folders, painting him as a neglectful father with secrets to hide. A chill ran through him, and he clenched his fists around the edges of the laptop. Whatever illusions he had about containing this scandal were gone. He could almost hear Lionel's mocking laughter, as if the rival CEO had meticulously planned every detail. Edward boots up the flash drive on a secure laptop, and a series of shocking files appear on screen, all related to his personal life and the twins, implicating powerful corporate players in the scandal. Edward couldn't tear his eyes from the screen. In a quiet corner of his office, he scrolled through file after file on the stolen flash drive, watching the puzzle pieces of Lionel Pierce's grand scheme fall into place. It wasn't just the usual corporate sabotage. Every document pointed to something carefully orchestrated, a personal attack on Edward's credibility and, more disturbingly, on his family. 1,000 little pricks of anger and fear danced along his spine. Adrian hovered nearby, arms crossed. "It's worse than we thought," he muttered, taking in the same incriminating emails. "Lionel's behind nearly all of it. He's been using every tool at his disposal to ruin you, and from these conversations, it looks like someone from inside your board might be feeding him intel." Edward rubbed his temples, exhaustion weighing on him. "Why bring my children into this?" he asked bitterly. "Ruin my company if you must, but attacking Valerie and the twins is crossing a line." Adrian shook his head. "Lionel knows exactly what he's doing. Personal matters get the media's blood pumping. He's counting on the scandal overshadowing your competence as CEO." A soft sound by the door startled them. Valerie stood there, her expression conflicted. She'd come searching for Edward in the late hour and overheard enough to grasp the situation. She stepped forward, glancing at the screen. "That's him, isn't it? Lionel," she said quietly. "I heard you mention he might be working with someone on your board." Edward closed the laptop, not wanting her to see more invasive details. "Yeah, he's orchestrating a takedown. He's got evidence, rumors, half-truths, everything that can paint me as unfit to run this company, or to be a father for that matter." Valerie's gaze shifted to the side, haunted. "He hated you," she murmured. "I never realized how much. Back when Lionel was just an acquaintance, he'd say little things, criticizing you, implying you'd break my heart. I thought he was just protective, maybe envious. But now—" She trailed off, the guilt in her eyes evident. Maybe I fed that resentment, talking about how you were always busy, how we never spent time together. Edward pressed his palm against the table. A heavy quiet stretched between them. "None of this is your fault," he said. "Lionel's the one taking it to another level. He's turning my personal life into a weapon." Valerie didn't look entirely convinced, but she let out a shaky sigh. "I just don't want the twins dragged into more chaos." Adrian's phone chimed. He checked it, face tightening. "We just got an invitation to a formal shareholder gala tomorrow night, hosted by one of your bigger investors. And from the guest list, it looks like Lionel's definitely going to be there." Edward glanced at the laptop again. "A public event," he muttered. "He'll use it as a stage to embarrass me if he can, but if I avoid it, I look like I'm running away." Valerie frowned. "Are you really going to face him in person, with all these cameras around?" "I don't have a choice," Edward said, shoulders squared. "He's made this personal. If I don't show up, he'll spin the narrative that I'm too scared to defend myself." The tension never left the air, even when they finally forced themselves to rest for the night. Edward arranged for Valerie and the twins to stay in a more private suite in the building. Security had been doubled, especially after the recent intruder. The storm outside was growing, but he'd take any measure necessary to protect them. Early the next morning, Valerie found Edward already preparing for the gala. He paced around his office with a phone pressed to his ear, checking last-minute details for damage control. When he hung up, she approached him, voice subdued. "I'm coming with you." He looked surprised. "I'm not sure that's wise," he said. "Lionel might see you there and twist this into a bigger spectacle." Valerie shook her head. "Let him. I won't hide anymore. If he thinks my presence makes you vulnerable, he's wrong. I'm not going to let him use our history or my children to sink you." Something like gratitude flickered across Edward's face. "All right," he agreed, though concern still pulled at the edges of his eyes. "Just keep your distance from Lionel, unless you have to speak to him." As evening fell, they arrived at an opulent hotel ballroom, a chandelier above them casting prisms of light across the polished floors. Edward wore a sleek black suit, Valerie an understated but elegant dress that drew glances for its quiet sophistication. Adrian trailed behind, scanning the room for any sign of trouble. Attendees from every corner of the corporate world filled the space. Wealthy investors mingled, sipping champagne and discussing the latest market trends, undercut by hushed whispers about Edward's recent scandal. Despite the tension, Edward wore a practiced smile, shaking hands, greeting board members, trying to project calm. Valerie remained at his side, head high, shoulders straight. At the heart of the crowd, Lionel Pierce appeared in a tailored suit, exuding an unnerving confidence. He spotted Edward and offered a mocking smile, raising his glass in a silent toast. The deliberate provocation made Edward's pulse pound. Not wanting to make a scene, he gave Lionel a brief, curt nod and continued greeting other guests. Over the next hour, the tension built like a violin string on the verge of snapping. Polite conversation masked an undercurrent of gossip and suspicion. Lionel chatted with a cluster of shareholders, occasionally glancing Edward's way. More than once, Edward noticed those shareholders nodding at Lionel's words, a glint of calculation in their eyes. Valerie felt the scrutiny too. As she and Edward passed one group, a man whispered, "Is that her? The ex-wife with the twins?" She swallowed, her composure tested, but she kept walking, chin lifted. Finally, the host tapped a microphone at the head of the ballroom. "Good evening, everyone," he announced. "Thank you for attending this year's mid-quarter gala. We appreciate your confidence in our corporate alliances, and we look forward to many more profitable ventures." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. The host flashed a gracious smile and continued, "I'd also like to welcome Mr. Edward Davis tonight. We all know the media excitement surrounding him, but let's focus on the future of our business and the importance of unity. That said, if anyone has concerns, you're welcome to share them in the spirit of open dialogue." At these words, Lionel smoothly stepped forward. "Why, thank you," he drawled, taking the mic. A hush fell as curious eyes turned on him. Edward's jaw tightened. Lionel offered a slow, theatrical smile. "We all know how uncertain these times can be for certain leaders," he said. "In fact, some of us have been approached by the press regarding scandalous personal matters. I think it's only fair, in the interest of transparency, that we address whether those matters might affect corporate stability." He let the words hang, fueling the crowd's interest. Edward stepped closer, fists tight at his sides. "If you have something to say, Lionel, say it plainly." "Oh, I intend to." Lionel's gaze flitted to Valerie, eyes glinting with a hint of smugness. "Our dear Edward's personal entanglements aren't just talk anymore, are they?" He placed the mic on the stand, then turned back to Edward, lowering his voice for a more private dig. "You've seen the headlines, the drop in your company's stock. Everyone's starting to question your judgment, all because you kept certain secrets." Valerie bristled. "This isn't about secrets," she hissed. "You're using my children and my past with Edward to push your agenda." "Your past?" Lionel echoed, feigning surprise. "I recall the times you confided in me about how your dear husband neglected you. Did he tell you he'd keep me off the board when his power grew? So many little slights that add up over time, wouldn't you say?" Edward stepped in front of Valerie, voice low. "You leave her out of this." Lionel's features hardened, but he kept his suave air. "Don't worry, I'll keep focusing on what matters, your empire. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to step down gracefully. If you do that, I might be inclined to dial back the media circus." A tense circle formed around them, cameras poised, onlookers creeping closer. Edward felt the weight of the entire room's gaze. For a brief second, he recalled how desperately he'd chased success, only to end up fighting to keep his family from becoming a corporate weapon. Lionel sneered, stepping close enough that Edward could feel the heat of his breath. "So what's it going to be?" he said, voice calm but laced with threat. "Are you going to watch your company crumble, or protect your precious family?" Valerie's hand curled around Edward's arm. He could sense her trembling, though her expression remained defiant. The camera's flashes burst like small explosions of light around them, capturing every subtle shift in their standoff. Then Lionel leaned in, voice low, reminding Edward that the scandal could get worse. For Valerie, for the twins. Edward stood stunned as cameras snapped, capturing his shock. Edward barely remembered the rest of the gala. After Lionel delivered his cutting threat, everything blurred together, murmuring voices, cameras flashing, and a swirl of onlookers who seemed all too excited by the spectacle. By the time Edward and Valerie left, the night air was cold against their heated skin, and their driver rushed them through the dark city streets in tense silence. They arrived at a high-walled estate just past midnight. Once a private retreat for Edward's top executives, it now served as a makeshift stronghold. Floodlights illuminated the tall iron gates, and security cameras rotated methodically from posts. Two armed guards stepped aside to let the car pass, their expressions grim. Valerie held a dozing Lily against her shoulder, while Noah blinked sleepily beside them. Even exhausted, the twins seemed to sense the worry in the adults. Valerie climbed out of the car first, turning in a slow circle to take in the imposing grounds. Edward followed, heart pounding with the weight of Lionel's words still echoing in his mind. Their escort, a stern-faced security officer, guided them through the front door. Inside, the estate's polished floors and high ceilings amplified every footstep. Adrian hurried forward, arms full of documents, phone pressed to his ear. He paused to greet them, voice low. "We've ramped up security. Nobody comes in or out without clearance." Valerie gave a tired nod. "Thank you," she whispered, struggling to keep Lily from waking completely. Noah yawned, gripping Edward's hand. "This way," Adrian said. "We've arranged rooms on the second floor. There's a living area for the kids, separate bedrooms, and your own secure office, Edward." He paused, glancing between them. "I know this is hardly a home, but it's the safest place we could manage on short notice." Edward appreciated the gesture. The tension of the gala still coiled inside him, but he forced a tight smile. "We're grateful," he said. "Let's get the twins settled." They walked up a wide staircase, passing oil paintings and potted plants. The hush of the estate pressed down on them. Every corridor seemed too large, as though normal life had fallen away and left them in a stark, echoing shell. Finally, Adrian opened a door to a spacious sitting room. Plush couches surrounded a low table, and a set of glass doors led to a balcony overlooking a garden. It was peaceful, but the security detail posted outside each window reminded them this calm was an illusion. Valerie carried Lily into one of the bedrooms while Edward ushered Noah along. The boy's eyes were half-lidded with sleep, but he still managed a drowsy question. "Where are we?" "Just a safe place," Edward murmured, tucking him under soft blankets. "Go to sleep, buddy. We're all here together." Noah nodded once, slipping into slumber almost instantly. Edward smoothed the hair off the boy's forehead, heart clenching at the trust in that small face. He'd missed so many of Noah's nights, so many bedtimes. In the next room, Valerie stood over Lily's bed, whispering softly until the girl's breathing evened out. When she emerged, she caught Edward's eye in the dimly lit hallway. "We need to talk," she said, and he nodded. They reconvened in the sitting room, alone except for the hush of nighttime. Valerie sank onto the couch, hugging her arms around herself. "I can't believe we're here, basically hiding," she whispered. "And that man, Lionel, he's still out there, gloating." Edward settled beside her, leaving a careful distance. "I know," he said softly. "If we keep going like this, always reacting to his moves, we'll never stop him. He's pushing harder than ever." She lifted her gaze, a new hardness in her eyes. "He used to be my friend, back when I felt abandoned by you. I told him things, about how you were never home, how I felt alone. I never thought he'd twist it all into this." She shook her head, her voice catching. "He's got so much resentment built up." Edward placed a hand on the back of the couch, hesitant to touch her shoulder without invitation. "We both made mistakes," he admitted. "Now Lionel's turning every regret or private confession into a weapon." He exhaled shakily. "Still, you and the kids are here now. I won't let him hurt you again." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. A security officer poked his head in. "Sir, I just wanted to confirm, do you want to check the new security footage from the perimeter?" Edward shook his head. "I'll look at it in the morning. Just keep the detail alert." The guard nodded and withdrew, leaving the two of them alone again. Valerie stood and walked to the balcony, sliding one door open to let the cool night air in. She leaned on the railing, eyes on the garden below. What happens if we can't beat him? If Lionel keeps digging and leaking stories? Edward rose to join her. He rested his elbows on the iron rail, close enough to feel her presence but not touching. "I'm trying to gather solid proof of his illegal tactics, tie him to the break-in at my office. If we can expose that, the board won't tolerate him." His voice dropped. "But I also have a feeling it won't be enough. He wants revenge, not just power. We need to be ready for anything." She nodded, the tension in her posture betraying her anxiety. "I hate that the children are wrapped up in this. They didn't ask for any of your corporate battles." He reached for her hand, and to his relief, she let him take it. "We'll protect them," he said firmly. "You're not alone in this anymore." They retreated inside. Exhaustion weighed on them both, so Valerie headed to her room, and Edward took another. Despite the lavish setting, it was a night of fitful sleep. Every noise in the hallway set him on edge. Every rustle of leaves outside made Valerie's heart pound. By dawn, neither felt rested. In the new day's light, they gathered for a quick breakfast in the sitting room. The twins, wide awake now, squirmed with curiosity about their new surroundings. Lily eyed the tall windows with fascination, while Noah poked at his plate of scrambled eggs, more interested in exploring. "Can we go outside?" Noah asked, glancing from Valerie to Edward. Valerie forced a smile. "Not right now," she answered gently. "But maybe later, if it's safe. For now, we have to stay indoors." The disappointment in the children's faces nearly broke Edward's heart. He tried distracting them with a playful gesture, offering a quick game on his phone, anything to ease their restlessness. It worked for the moment, and the twins settled to watch silly animations on the device. Meanwhile, Adrian stepped into the room carrying a new stack of documents, whispering to Edward about potential leads on which board member might be conspiring with Lionel. Valerie overheard fragments of the conversation, embezzlement hints, suspicious phone calls, hush money. It was like stepping into a crime thriller, except this was their real life. Hours slipped by in tense discussions and phone calls. Security patrolled every corridor, vigilantly scanning monitors. The children grew bored. Valerie tried reading them stories, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows, half expecting to see a camera lens or intruder. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. By late afternoon, a sudden commotion echoed through the estate. 2 security guards shouted from the front hallway, racing toward the living area. Valerie lurched to her feet, adrenaline spiking. Edward rushed into the corridor, heart hammering. "What happened?" he demanded. A guard holstered his weapon, breathing heavily. "False alarm, sir," he managed, red-faced. Motion sensor was triggered near the side entrance. Turned out to be a gardener who forgot to check in. Despite the explanation, the scare hung in the air. Valerie stood near the sitting room's threshold with Lily clinging to her leg and Noah peering around her hip. Edward's eyes flicked over his children's frightened faces, cursing Lionel under his breath. Later that night, after the twins fell asleep and the house quieted, Edward and Valerie found themselves alone again. She paced the hallway, tension radiating from her with every step. "I can't live like this," she hissed when Edward caught up to her. "Locked away, jumping at shadows, but I don't see a way out." He touched her arm, gently stopping her. "You're right. We can't stay on the defensive forever. We need a plan to end this, and once we know who on the board is helping Lionel, we can corner him." Valerie glanced toward the children's bedroom door. "I used to think your world was just board meetings and big deals. Now I see it's more like a battlefield." Her voice trembled slightly. "I wish I'd known before." He understood her regret, because he felt it too. All those years he had devoted to expanding his empire, and now he had to muster everything he'd learned to shield the people he cared about. "I'm sorry," he said, the words simple but heavy with meaning. They were about to part ways for the night when Valerie paused, noticing a white envelope on the carpet by the doorway. She stooped, picking it up warily. The front was blank, no address or postage. With cautious fingers, she opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Her eyes widened at the words typed in bold letters, "End this or your children will pay." Shock lit her face, her breath catching in her throat. Edward stood rigid at her side, reading the message over her shoulder. Fear sparked in his chest. Someone had managed to slip that under the door, bypassing the layers of security around them. Valerie turned to Edward, fear and resolve colliding in her gaze. Edward stood in the hallway with the threatening note in his trembling hands, his mind racing to piece together how anyone had managed to slip it under the door. Security was supposed to be airtight, yet somehow the enemy had found a way in, quietly leaving that chilling ultimatum. Valerie hovered close by, arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting to the children's bedroom. Even the muted lamplight seemed harsh against her tense features. He waved over the nearest guard, demanding a sweep of every corridor and exit. More than ever, he realized that hiding behind walls was never going to solve their problem. Lionel Pierce's grasp extended further than mere corporate boardrooms. Whoever was inside Edward's circle, feeding information, coordinating these scare tactics, had to be rooted out, and fast. Once the estate's staff set off to double-check the grounds, Edward and Valerie retreated to the sitting room where Adrian and Tasha were waiting. Valerie clutched the note, voice unsteady. "We're pinned in here," she said, eyes flashing with anger. "First the paparazzi on the plane, now this. They're coming after the children, Edward." He nodded, swallowing hard. "They want me out of the company. If I step down, they might ease off, but there's no guarantee they'll leave you alone. You saw how far Lionel is willing to go." Adrian slid a folder across the table. "I did more digging into our board members. There's one name that keeps cropping up in covert emails, Stewart. Financial records hint he's been receiving large deposits from a shell company connected to Lionel." Edward's gaze darkened. "Stewart's been on the board since the beginning. He's always been polite, never critical, but maybe that's exactly why he slipped under the radar." Valerie paced behind the couch, tension evident in every stride. "So what do we do now? Confront him directly?" Edward exhaled. "If he's complicit, he'll just lie. No, we need undeniable proof. Then we can move against him and Lionel. We can't keep reacting to threats. We have to go on the offensive." Tasha looked thoughtful. "Could we smoke him out at a formal gathering? Something where the board, shareholders, everyone has to show their cards?" A flicker of determination sparked in Edward's eyes. "Yes, a shareholder meeting. We'll call it under the guise of discussing the recent controversies. If Stewart is truly in Lionel's pocket, he'll panic when I start showing evidence. We can push him into revealing himself." Valerie frowned. "What about the children? We can't risk them being caught in another chaotic scene." Edward's voice softened. "We'll keep them close. I'd rather they weren't there, but the truth is nowhere seems safe. I'll post more security around them, around you. Once we prove who's behind all this, maybe we can finally get out of the crosshairs." She hesitated, then sighed. "We can't go on like this forever. Let's do it." That night, Edward and Adrian worked late into the morning, sifting through documents, constructing a careful plan to expose Stewart's hidden deals and tie Lionel to the sabotage. Every so often, Edward glanced toward the hallway where the children slept, aware that time was running short. The note's threat haunted him, spurring him to work faster. The next day, Adrian reached out to the board and major shareholders, insisting on an urgent meeting to address the ongoing crisis. Whispers swirled of Edward's potential resignation, fueling curiosity and guaranteeing a full house in the auditorium. By mid-afternoon, everyone had assembled at one of the city's grand conference halls, cameras lurking outside for a glimpse of the embattled CEO. Before departing the estate, Edward checked on Noah and Lily. They were dressed in comfortable clothes, jackets zipped up, heads full of questions he couldn't fully answer. Valerie consoled them, explaining in gentle terms they were going to a grown-up meeting and to stay by her side no matter what. A car ride later, they arrived at a private entrance to the auditorium, security hustling them inside with quick, urgent footsteps. The hall was a vast, tiered space with rows of seats stretching up to a high ceiling. Edward noticed various board members perched in the front row, faces grim. Several prominent investors clustered near the stage, murmuring to each other. And in one corner, standing with a trademark self-assured stance, was Lionel Pierce. Their eyes met. Edward felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to remain composed. This was the moment he'd planned for. Valerie and the twins waited in a back room, guarded by Tasha and two vigilant security officers. Edward stepped out onto the stage amid scattered applause. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just approached a podium set under bright lights. The microphone squeaked, and the murmurs died down. "Thank you for attending on such short notice," Edward began, scanning the crowd. "Recent events have questioned not just my leadership, but my personal integrity. I'm here to address those concerns head-on." He paused, letting the hush settle. "First, I want to state clearly, I will protect my family from any further exploitation. We have been targeted by rumors and attacks that go far beyond standard corporate rivalry." Some in the crowd stirred, exchanging nervous glances. Lionel stood at the back, arms folded, an unimpressed smirk curving his lips. Edward pressed on, I have evidence implicating individuals who've conspired to undermine both my reputation and this company's stability. It's time those individuals were held accountable. He lifted a folder, pulling out documents that Adrian had painstakingly verified. Shareholders, board members, Edward continued, please review these. Screens on either side of the stage lit up, displaying carefully redacted emails and transaction logs. The hush became a crackle of tension. These messages tie certain board actions to an outside entity, one funneling money to sabotage our brand, to sabotage me. A restless wave passed through the audience. One man in the front row, Stuart, paled visibly. He kept glancing at Lionel, who merely gave him a small, tight nod, as though encouraging him to stay quiet. Edward didn't miss the exchange. Specifically, Edward said, voice clear, I have reason to believe that Stuart Reynolds facilitated leaks and misinformation on behalf of a competitor. He motioned to the images on the screens where digital footprints linked Stuart's name to suspicious offshore accounts. A wave of gasps rippled around the room. Stuart lurched to his feet. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. You're forging these documents to save your own skin. Edward leveled his gaze. Then you won't mind if we invite an independent audit. I'm prepared to have these files examined by a third party. Panicked, Stuart looked toward Lionel for support. At that moment, Lionel stepped forward, forcibly seizing the narrative. I wouldn't put it past Edward Davis to fabricate anything to shift blame from his own neglectful behavior, Lionel declared, drawing the room's attention with cool authority. After all, he's the one who's been deceiving the public about his family. Murmurs grew louder, and in the confusion no one noticed a group of strangers slipping into the back of the auditorium. They wore casual attire, blending with the crowd, but the tension in their stances suggested something more sinister. Tasha, stationed near a side door, noticed them first. She whispered to a security guard who discreetly reached for his radio. Meanwhile, Valerie, hearing the swelling commotion, peeked out from backstage. She kept the twins close, eyes scanning for signs of danger. She spotted Lionel's triumphant posture and felt a chill. He was orchestrating something. She could sense it. Suddenly, a protester in the crowd shouted, "Edward Davis is a fraud!" More voices erupted, swirling into chaos. Security guards rushed to contain the disruption, but the group of strangers took advantage of the confusion. Two of them broke away and slipped backstage. A frantic cry from the corridor echoed behind the curtain. Valerie gasped, pulling Noah and Lily closer. Tasha ran to intercept the intruders, but they shoved past her with surprising force. Immediately, the children shrank back, and one intruder grabbed Lily, dragging her toward the exit. Noah screamed, clinging to his sister's hand. Valerie lunged, desperately trying to pry Lily free. The intruder sneered, stepping back with the child in his grasp. Tasha fought to restrain the second intruder, but he was stronger than he looked. Panic roared through Valerie's mind, her heart pounding like a hammer in her chest. On stage, Edward tried to keep control of the meeting, but the commotion backstage reached his ears. Valerie's scream tore through the noise. Immediately, he abandoned the podium, ignoring the microphones and gasps from the shareholders. He sprinted behind the curtain, adrenaline boiling in his veins. He found chaos. Tasha locked in a struggle with one intruder, Valerie clutching Lily's arm while the other intruder tried to yank her free. Noah stood frozen in terror. Without a second's hesitation, Edward leaped forward, tackling Lily's captor. They tumbled to the ground, Lily slipping from the man's grip. Security guards arrived in a rush, subduing the intruders under a tangle of limbs. Valerie pulled Lily and Noah close, tears in her eyes. The children sobbed, clinging to their mother. Edward, breathing hard, rose to his knees, checking them for injuries. Lily trembled, but her little arms locked around Edward's neck the moment he tried to reassure her. All around them, confusion and fear hung in the air. A wave of spectators from the auditorium pressed forward, anxious for a glimpse of the drama unfolding backstage. Word spread quickly that someone tried to grab the CEO's children. Cameras flashed, capturing Edward kneeling, arms around the twins. His corporate speech lay forgotten, overshadowed by raw parental instinct. The board members clustered near the stage entrance, some with phones in hand, some in utter shock. Security hustled the subdued intruders away. Meanwhile, Lionel lingered at the far side of the stage, watching Edward cradle his children. He wore a half smile, calm as though everything had gone exactly to plan. The shareholders watch Edward cradle his terrified children, a father above all else. Lionel, lurking at the auditorium's edge, smirks, because the real blow has yet to land. Edward stood in the backstage chaos, still holding Lily in his arms while Noah clung to his leg. The rush of onlookers behind him blurred into a buzzing crowd of half-seen faces. Lights from camera phones cast flickering shapes on the walls, and the hum of urgent voices filled the air. With each breath, he tried to steady his pounding heart, but the fear in his children's eyes cut deeper than any business threat he had ever faced. Security guards blocked the corridor leading to the stage, keeping curious onlookers at bay. Valerie approached in a rush, drawing Noah into a protective hug as soon as he let go of Edward. Her voice came in hushed, trembling words. "Are they all right?" she asked, eyes darting over Lily to check for bruises or scrapes. "They're shaken," Edward managed, voice raw. "But they're safe." Tasha stood nearby, cradling her elbow where one of the intruders had shoved her. She gave a stiff nod, letting the adrenaline subside. "We need to get them out of here," she said, casting a wary glance at the gawking crowd. "This place is compromised." Edward couldn't agree more. He exchanged a look with Adrian, who was already on the phone arranging vehicles and an exit route. The entire shareholder meeting was effectively over. No one cared about corporate resolutions after what had just happened. And though Edward's paternal instincts had been on full display, the incident was sure to trigger another storm of headlines and social media uproar. Outside, a murmur of sympathy rose among certain employees and investors. The footage of Edward shielding his children from danger would inevitably circulate, painting him as more than just a ruthless CEO. It gave him a fragile public sympathy, but he knew it might not be enough to halt the corporate fallout brewing behind the scenes. They slipped out through a side exit into a narrow alley. Flashlights flared in the darkness as security escorted them to a waiting SUV. Valerie settled in the back seat with the twins. She pressed her lips to Lily's forehead, trying to calm the girl's shaking sobs. Edward took the seat beside them, gently drawing Noah onto his lap. He offered a reassuring rub on the boy's shoulders, though his own pulse still hammered a warning beat. Adrian jumped into the front passenger seat, Tasha into another car behind them. As soon as the doors slammed shut, the little convoy peeled away from the auditorium. Edward glanced back once, just in time to see Lionel's silhouette in the alley's mouth, a faint grin on his face, as if their narrow escape was merely the opening act. By the time they arrived at Edward's corporate tower, it was well past midnight. A different kind of tension filled the lobby. Employees who had remained to watch the shareholder meeting from live streams gave anxious stares as Edward and Valerie hurried the children through a private elevator. No one spoke, but the unspoken question flickered in every gaze. How much more can the company take? They gathered in Edward's executive suite, a place that now felt more like a hideout than an office. Adrian clicked on the news to see if coverage had already begun. Sure enough, a scrolling headline read, "CEO Edward Davis protects children from intruders, corporate stability in question." Valerie's shoulders sank, exhaustion carving new lines into her face. She nudged the twins toward a couch in the corner, quietly asking them to rest. Within minutes, the board began calling. Edward's phone buzzed non-stop, along with urgent emails demanding an explanation. When he finally answered, a tense chorus of voices spilled through the speaker. "We can't go on like this, Edward. This is a liability for the entire corporation. Your personal problems have put us all at risk." Edward pinched the bridge of his nose, fighting the urge to lash out. For all their talk of empathy, the board cared primarily about the bottom line. "You saw what happened," he said, controlling his tone. "This wasn't my doing. My family was attacked. What do you expect me to do? Simply let it happen." The line fell silent for a moment. Then one voice, older and more formal, rose to speak. "We understand it wasn't your fault. But until this situation stabilizes, the board has decided it's best you relinquish direct control of day-to-day operations. We can't allow shareholders to lose further confidence." A cold dread washed over Edward. He glanced at Valerie, who was trying to coax Lily into sleep on the couch. "So, you're pushing me out?" he asked, forcing an even voice. "Temporarily," the board member clarified, "until the scandal cools and we can handle the PR fallout. Consider it an extended leave." He almost laughed at the gentle euphemism, but the effect was the same. They were stripping him of authority. He hung up without waiting for more explanations, feeling numb. Valerie noticed his dark expression and rose from the couch. She took one look at the phone in his hand and understood. "You're out?" she asked softly. When he nodded, she paled. "Edward, I'm so sorry. This is all because of me and the children." He set the phone down on a table. "No, it's because Lionel orchestrated every bit of this nightmare. But yes, the board sees my personal matters as a distraction." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, eyes swimming with guilt. "Then maybe we should leave. The twins and I could go somewhere safe. Maybe that'll calm things." Anger flared in him, though not at her. "No, you're not responsible for this, and leaving won't fix it. He'll just claim victory and keep twisting the truth." "But the children," her voice cracked. "Every time they appear, something awful happens. I can't keep them in this environment." He closed the distance between them, lowering his tone. "I understand, but you're safer with me right now. Lionel's shown he doesn't respect boundaries. If you run alone, you'll be unprotected." She pressed her lips into a thin line, wrestling with the fear in her chest. At last, she nodded, though tears flickered at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know how much more we can handle," she whispered. Before Edward could reply, the door to the suite swung open and Lionel Pierce strolled in, escorted by two of Edward's own security guards. Edward stiffened, stepping protectively in front of Valerie. "What is he doing here?" he demanded, glaring at the guards. The taller guard spoke apologetically. "He insisted he had urgent business. We couldn't hold him out since he's a major shareholder. He said he's here on official company matters." Lionel smoothed his lapel, offering a condescending bow. "I heard about the unfortunate events at the auditorium. Thought I'd pay a visit." His tone dripped with insincerity. "And I see you're playing house with your little family in the office." Valerie's face hardened. "You have no right to be here, Lionel." He shrugged. "I have every right. I'm a significant investor now, thanks to the meltdown in your stock. I came to see if Edward is finally ready to step down for good." Edward's fists clenched. "I'll never hand the company over to you. I know exactly what you did." Lionel's eyes gleamed. "I'm just offering a peaceful exit. The board's already pushing you aside. If you leave voluntarily, you might salvage some dignity, maybe keep a portion of your shares. You can retire with your adorable kids." Then his gaze flickered to Valerie. "And your ex-wife. Or new wife, whichever role she's playing these days." Valerie's jaw tightened, but she said nothing, unwilling to let him bait her. Lionel's mocking smirk only grew sharper. "Well, if you insist on dragging this out, I can't guarantee your children's faces won't be all over the tabloids tomorrow. People love a good story about an absentee father suddenly playing hero. Once the world digs deeper into their private lives, who knows what skeletons might appear?" Edward took a step forward, pure fury rising. Before he could speak, the guards stepped between them, urging Lionel to leave. With a final, theatrically sad shake of his head, Lionel turned away. "You keep making it harder on yourself," he said over his shoulder, "and on them." As soon as he was gone, Valerie found herself trembling. She sank onto a chair, gripping the armrest. Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, anger and worry warring inside him. They'd seen Lionel's capacity for cruelty, but now it felt like a bottomless pit. If Edward didn't do something drastic, the next attack might strike even closer to home. He glanced at the sleeping children on the couch, and a painful resolve crystallized. "That's it," he said quietly. "No more half measures. I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect them." Adrian and Tasha entered, having followed Lionel out to ensure he truly left. Adrian rubbed his temples, his voice taut with frustration. "We can still fight him. We have enough evidence of his illegal moves to mount a legal case. It might force him to back off." Edward nodded, the flicker of desperation in his eyes. "Let's prepare an injunction or a restraining order. Get the courts involved. Even if it only slows him down, it's something." Valerie looked up, her face drawn. "I don't want to put the twins through a court circus. But we have no choice, do we?" Edward knelt beside her, voice hushed. "I don't see another way. We file legal motions, gather every ounce of proof, and once we expose him, maybe the board will let me resume control, or I'll walk away with my head high, not as a coward who let him bully us." She studied his eyes. "And if he still doesn't stop? Then we find another way," he said, the determination in his tone unwavering. That night she decided against leaving. For all her fears, she realized going alone offered no better safety. The plan was set. Push Lionel into the legal spotlight, show the courts and the media that Edward wasn't the unstable monster he'd been portrayed as. If fortune smiled, the public might rally behind him even more. Still, none of that eased the gnawing dread in her stomach. The children slept fitfully, stirring from nightmares. Valerie soothed them as best she could, silently cursing the day she ever confided her marital troubles to Lionel Pierce. Near dawn, Edward and Valerie sat together in a dim corner of the suite, going over statements and timelines for their legal strategy. Shadows played across the floor, the hush of the building pressing on their ears. Just as exhaustion threatened to overtake them, Valerie's phone rang, the unexpected sound cutting through the quiet. She answered, trying not to wake the children. The voice on the other end belonged to a shaken friend who had overheard Lionel boasting at a late-night gathering. Valerie's skin went cold as she listened. Finally, she hung up, her hand trembling so hard the phone slipped onto the table. Edward looked at her in alarm. "What is it?" Valerie swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "Lionel just challenged you to a public showdown, a final chance to either relinquish your remaining corporate rights or face total ruin." Edward awoke to a gray sky streaked with the first light of dawn. He had barely slept after Valerie took that phone call, the one confirming Lionel's bold invitation to what sounded like a final showdown. The idea of yet another tense confrontation weighed on him, yet he saw no other choice. If he refused, Lionel would spin it as cowardice, and the company would crumble under the swirling rumors. If he agreed, he risked stepping into a trap. He leaned against the kitchen counter in his corporate suite, coffee untouched in front of him. Valerie appeared, drawn by the morning hush, her eyes shadowed from lack of rest. She took a spot beside him, glancing at his stern profile. "We have to do it, don't we?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yes, Lionel's made sure there's no clean exit. Our only chance is to confront him publicly, show the investors and media that I'm not the monster he's painted me to be." Then his expression softened. "But I don't want you or the twins anywhere near the stage." Valerie's lips tightened into a line. "We'll stay out of sight. The children have been through enough." She sipped the coffee he'd left untouched, inhaling slowly. "Just promise me you'll be careful. He's more dangerous than ever." "I promise," Edward said, though he felt the lie in his throat. There was no guarantee of safety with Lionel orchestrating the event. Still, he had no choice. Later that morning, he and Adrian began final preparations. The confrontation was set for a luxurious corporate summit at an upscale resort perched by the coastline. It was the kind of polished venue used for exclusive shareholder conferences and industry galas. Word traveled fast that Edward Davis and Lionel Pierce would face off on neutral ground, with high-profile investors, reporters, and even a few curious board members flying in from across the country. Valerie and the twins arrived separately. They were escorted by Tasha to a secure suite in the resort's upper floors, well away from the main conference halls. It offered a sweeping view of the ocean, the water glittering under the midday sun. Despite the serene vista, the tension inside felt stifling. Valerie tried occupying Noah and Lily with simple board games, but their excitement at the fancy room was tempered by the adult worry they sensed all around. In the grand ballroom below, Edward and Adrian oversaw last-minute arrangements. Rows of velvet chairs faced a raised platform meant for opening remarks, ringed by display monitors. Cameras had been set up for the official press coverage. The entire space hummed with hushed conversations and sideways glances, everyone aware that this might be the final act in a corporate war that had gone far beyond business. Edward's heart pounded when Lionel strode in. Tall, impeccably dressed and brimming with confidence, Lionel greeted a few key investors before turning to Edward. Their eyes locked. There was no need for words. The tension spoke volumes. Edward could almost see the triumph dancing in Lionel's gaze, as though everything was still going according to plan. A bell chimed, summoning attendees to take their seats. High-backed chairs filled quickly with curious guests and stone-faced board members. At the back of the room, near the exit, a small group of security guards remained on standby, scanning for any hint of a repeat of the violent fiasco that had unfolded before. Taking center stage, a spokesperson introduced both men and tried to keep the tone neutral, calling it an important discussion on the future of the company. The crowd settled, hushed in anticipation. Edward stepped forward first. "Thank you for joining us," he began, voice calm but carrying the strain of weeks of conflict. "Our company has faced extreme turbulence lately, tied to personal matters that should never have become public. While I acknowledge my share of responsibility, many of these developments have been fueled by deliberate sabotage." A few flashes from cameras punctuated his words. He pressed on, highlighting how malicious leaks had targeted both his professional reputation and his private life. "In the interest of honesty," he said, "yes, I have children who were not publicly acknowledged before. I regret the secrecy, but it was meant to protect them, something I have every right to do as a father. I never intended my family to become pawns in a corporate game." Lionel stepped forward with a flourish, cutting off any applause that might have followed Edward's statement. "Charming words, but the facts speak otherwise. We've all seen the chaos, the negative press, the falling stock prices. Isn't it true, Edward, that your personal indiscretions have cost this company millions? Could the board or shareholders trust a CEO who can't even manage his own household without creating scandals?" Edward's hands curled into fists behind the podium. "You're the one orchestrating these so-called scandals, Lionel. I have proof of your involvement in planting stories, funding intruders, and bribing insiders." Lionel smirked, his confident posture unwavering. "Conjecture. Unless you have something concrete, it's your word against mine." At that moment, a voice from the crowd spoke up. Charlotte Lynn, a board member who had quietly supported Edward, stood. She held up a folder. "Actually, Mr. Pierce, there's more than Edward's word. I've been collecting evidence for weeks. Correspondence you had with Stuart Reynolds, verifying the money trail and explicit instructions to smear Edward's reputation." A buzz of excitement rippled through the ballroom. Lionel's smirk faltered for a split second. He quickly regained composure. "This is a farce," he scoffed. "Those documents could be forged." Charlotte stepped forward, passing the folder to a neutral third party, a well-known industry lawyer who had been invited to oversee the proceedings. "Feel free to verify them," she said firmly. "They'll stand up to scrutiny." Edward nodded in gratitude at Charlotte, then continued, "With or without Lionel's cooperation, An independent investigation is already underway. We intend to file charges if the findings confirm illegal activity." A hush fell over the room. It felt like the tide had turned in Edward's favor. Even so, he kept his guard up. Lionel wasn't the kind to walk away without a fight. Valerie watched everything unfold via a live video feed upstairs, hand resting on Noah's shoulder. She felt her heart race with every word. Lily clutched a small plush toy, eyes darting from the screen to her mother's anxious face. Tasha stood by the suite's door, arms crossed, as if expecting trouble at any moment. Back in the ballroom, Lionel turned to the crowd, voice rising. "This is all an elaborate show. Edward Davis is desperate. He'll do anything to avoid stepping down. He's twisting facts to distract you from the truth. He neglected his own family to chase power, and now he's paying for it." Heads swiveled between Edward and Lionel, each side waiting to see who would blink first. Edward took a steady breath, speaking slowly. "I made mistakes, but I'm owning them. You, on the other hand, used my personal life as a weapon, crossing every line of decency, and you've endangered innocent people in the process." A flicker of something like fury passed over Lionel's face. For a moment he looked poised to retort, but the lawyer examining Charlotte's documents suddenly cleared his throat. "These records appear legitimate," the lawyer said. "They show a series of money transfers from Mr. Pierce's accounts to certain board members, as well as emails instructing them to leak internal data and personal details about Mr. Davis." A stunned murmur rippled. Lionel's posture stiffened. "This is nonsense," he snapped. "I'll fight any charges thrown my way." Yet his voice wavered just enough for the crowd to pick up on it. Edward pressed his advantage. "No more lies," he stated firmly. "We have the digital footprints. The only question is whether you'll admit what you've done or force me to expose every detail in court." For a moment, Lionel seemed to waver. Then his features hardened with a last show of bravado. "Expose whatever you want," he hissed, stepping forward. "The board has already sidelined you, Edward. By the time this is over, you'll be stripped of everything you built." Without warning, a group of uniformed officers stepped into the ballroom, escorted by Adrian. One officer approached Lionel. "Sir, we have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of conspiracy, fraud, and harassment." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Lionel's eyes flared with shock, then morphed into cold anger. Reporters sprang to their feet, snapping photos as the officers took Lionel by the arm. He tried to shake them off, but two more officers blocked his way. As they led him from the stage, he paused in front of Edward, leaning in with a venomous whisper. "You think this is over, Davis? You haven't beaten the real players yet. I'm just one piece in a bigger game." Edward met his gaze steadily. "We'll see," he said. Lionel's eyes flicked to the cameras, then back to Edward. "You'll regret pushing this." And then the officers hustled him away, pressed by a throng of onlookers. With every step he took toward the exit, the tension in the room loosened fractionally, though Edward couldn't shake the uneasy warning Lionel had left behind. Charlotte Lynn offered Edward a slight nod. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some shareholders looked stunned, others relieved. The sense of a narrowly averted disaster filled the space. Edward felt a rush of conflicting emotions, relief that Lionel was finally in custody, yet dread over his cryptic threat. He caught sight of the feed from upstairs, Valerie's face on a monitor, eyes full of guarded hope. Lionel was taken into custody, but not before hissing to Edward, "You haven't beaten the real players yet." Edward and Valerie exchanged troubled looks, realizing a bigger conspiracy threatens them still. After Lionel was led away in handcuffs, the conference hall slowly emptied. A hush fell over the once bustling space, leaving Edward alone at the center of the stage, his heart still pounding from the confrontation. In the flickering lights of the news cameras shutting down, he felt more relief than triumph. Lionel's threat echoed in his thoughts. You haven't beaten the real players yet. But for now, one of his greatest tormentors was finally under arrest. Adrian rushed to his side, clutching a handful of legal documents. We've got to meet with the lawyers. Lionel's arrest is just the start. The board will want answers." His voice was urgent but carried a note of cautious hope. Edward looked up at the balcony where Valerie and the children had been watching through the live feed. He gave a small nod, relief tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I need to see them first," he said. "Then we'll handle the rest." They slipped backstage, weaving through the lingering press. Security guards flanked him, but for once they weren't wrestling intruders or shielding him from paparazzi. Instead, they guided him quietly down a hall until he reached the private room where Valerie waited. She was pacing, her arms folded. Tasha stood nearby, and the twins were in 2 chairs pushed against the wall, looking anxious. As soon as Lily spotted Edward, she hopped to her feet. "Daddy!" she called, voice wobbly with relief. Noah followed suit, and both children ran into Edward's arms. He embraced them, heart full. Valerie placed a hand on his back, her expression a mix of pride and lingering worry. "It's over for Lionel," Edward murmured, kissing the tops of the kids' heads. "He won't be able to harass you again." He forced a small smile when the twins looked up at him. "I promise." Valerie exhaled, stepping closer. "I'm proud of you," she said in a soft voice. "You stood your ground." He reached for her hand. "I had to, for all of us." A subdued knock at the door interrupted the moment. A corporate lawyer poked his head in, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Davis, there's another matter. Some of your own board members. Well, let's just say Lionel's final words might hold some truth. There could be larger forces involved." Edward's brief respite vanished. "I'll deal with it." He turned to Valerie. "Wait here with the kids. Tasha can stay too. I'll be back as soon as I can." She started to protest but stopped herself, brushing her fingertips against his. He nodded once, slipping away, following the lawyer down a winding hallway into a dimly lit side office. Inside, Charlotte Lynn stood at a long table, piles of documents spread before her. "We pulled everything on Stuart Reynolds," she said in a hushed tone. "He wasn't working alone. Certain shell companies track back to other board members. Some of them have close ties to influential politicians, wealthy interests. People Lionel might have been colluding with." Edward braced his palms on the table. "So there's a bigger conspiracy behind this. Lionel was just the public face." Charlotte pushed a set of files toward him, pages thick with financial data. "Exactly. They all have one goal, controlling this company. If you're removed for good, they can swoop in, break it up, or merge it with a rival. Make a killing in the process." A flicker of anger crossed Edward's eyes. This building, these people, the entire empire, it was all meant to be the pinnacle of his hard work and vision. Now, it felt like a battlefield. "We'll expose them, one by one," he said. "Gather whatever evidence we need. I'm done letting them use my personal life as leverage." Charlotte tapped the desk. "You'll have to move fast. Some are already calling for a board vote tomorrow. With Lionel arrested, they might regroup under a new figurehead." He grimaced. "I won't let them blindside me. It's time they see I'm not just defending my family, but my company too." Through the glass panel in the door, Edward spotted Adrian pacing outside, phone in hand, relaying urgent instructions. The pressure was mounting, but so was Edward's resolve. He rifled through a few more documents, scanning damning details of hush money and hidden accounts. Then he walked out, catching Adrian's arm. "Let's schedule an immediate board meeting," Edward said. "Tonight, if possible. No more waiting. We'll show them what we have." Adrian nodded, a determined glint in his eyes. "I'll get it done." Back in the private room, Edward updated Valerie. As soon as she heard the words "bigger conspiracy," her face went pale. She looked at the twins, a protective fire lighting in her gaze. "Whatever happens," she said firmly, "we'll stay by your side. The kids deserve to see their father fight for what's right." He took her hand. "I'd never ask you to leave. We've been apart too long already." In that moment, everything else seemed to fade. The corporate drama, the legal battles, and all he saw was the woman he'd once loved, still standing with him in a storm that tested them both. They parted ways again for the next few hours, Edward diving headlong into preparations for the emergency board meeting. In a grand conference suite at the resort, board members arrived under tight security. Whispers rippled through the corridors. With Lionel behind bars, many were on edge, uncertain which direction the company would take next. Edward stood at the head of the gleaming table, posture upright. The board members took their seats, some looking guilty, others defiant. The hush that fell was thick as tar. Into that silence, Edward spoke. "Tonight, we settle this. We've just witnessed an attempt at my children's safety, at my livelihood, and at this company. Enough is enough." He motioned to Adrian, who switched on a projector that illuminated the far wall with clear evidence: bank statements, email chains, sign-off logs, and confidential memos. Each slide tied certain board members to Lionel or revealed suspicious dealings. Murmurs turned into protests from those implicated. One man stood, reddening with anger, while another demanded a break to consult legal counsel. "No breaks," Edward said, voice unyielding. "We'll finish this here and now." When the final slide scrolled, a heavy silence followed. The guilty parties looked down at their folded hands, a few exchanging frantic glances. At last, Edward spoke again. "As of this moment, I'm calling for the immediate expulsion of any board member proven to have colluded with Lionel or engaged in illegal activity. If you choose not to resign, I will push for legal action. And rest assured, the rest of the board will stand with me because they know what's at stake if we let corruption continue." A young board member, who had previously sat on the fence, rose. "I second that motion," she said firmly. "We can't allow a toxic minority to control us." The tide turned swiftly. Fearful of deeper investigations, 2 implicated members resigned on the spot. A third tried to argue technicalities, but faced with the mounting evidence, he too stepped down. Edward watched with a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the cancer in his company was being removed. Sorrow that it had ever come to this. By midnight, the meeting concluded. Edward stood alone in the silent corridor, leaning against a marble column. Outside the large windows, moonlight reflected on the dark ocean. Despite the victory, a hollow ache filled him. So much had been lost during the fight: trust, time, peace of mind. He heard footsteps behind him. Valerie approached, arms folded. "How'd it go?" she asked softly. He turned, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "They're gone, the conspirators. We've filed formal charges. The rest of the board wants me to stay as CEO and rebuild, but part of me wonders if I should just walk away." Valerie regarded him quietly. "You've built something extraordinary here, but maybe you lost pieces of yourself along the way." She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "You don't have to be alone in building it back. We can do it together, or you can step back for a while. The choice is yours." Edward's gaze dropped to their joined hands, a surge of gratitude catching him by surprise. He recalled the early days of their marriage, how they dreamed of a future that balanced work and family. He'd let those dreams fade, consumed by ambition. Now, everything had changed. A faint chime sounded from upstairs, signaling that the twins were stirring. The day's whirlwind had left them restless, but at least they were safe. Edward squeezed Valerie's hand. "Let's see the kids," he said, voice thick with emotion. They rode the elevator up together, Tasha greeting them in the hallway with a small smile. Noah and Lily were waiting in the lounge, eyes bright despite the late hour. When they spotted their parents, they ran over, clamoring about hearing the news that the bad guys were gone. Edward knelt, pulling them both close. "That's right," he murmured, resting his chin on Lily's hair, Noah's hand clasped in his own. "We're safe now. We can finally move forward." Later, they stepped out onto a wide balcony that overlooked the resort's grounds and the sea beyond. Stars glittered overhead, and the hush of waves drifted faintly from the shore. The children at last, had drifted to sleep in the next room, leaving Edward and Valerie alone under the quiet sky. He leaned against the railing, feeling the cool breeze on his face. Valerie stood beside him. "You did it," she said, pride warm in her tone. He let out a soft laugh, the tension draining from his shoulders. "We did it," he corrected. "I could never have gotten this far without you." He paused, then added, "Without the kids, I might not have had the courage to fight so fiercely." They fell silent, gazing at the shimmering lights of the city in the distance. A city that had once been Edward's sole focus. Now it was simply the backdrop to something more precious, the family he had nearly lost. Gently, he turned to Valerie, sliding his hand into hers. "I'm not sure what tomorrow brings," he admitted, "but I know I won't make the same mistakes again. My priorities have changed." Her eyes glistened with quiet relief. "Mine too." He pulled her closer, heart full as he pictured a new beginning, one where he could be both a father and a leader, but never at the expense of the people he loved. "This is just the beginning," he said softly. Valerie nodded, and together they watched the city lights, the promise of a brighter future shining before them. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen